大家好，我是杨澜，欢迎收看《文化相对论》。这些年有个词儿很流行，叫做斜杠青年呢，指的是一个人可以拥有不止一种身份，需要用斜杠加以区分。比如说，我是一个主持人、企业家，我也是一个吃货哈。如果你愿意的话，你的身份可以多达几十种。实际上，我们的国籍、性别、职业、兴趣、信仰都会成为我们的标签。而在现代社会，不同的标签呈指数增长。神经科学告诉我们，人类出自本能，会去寻找那些和自己有某些共性的群体。当我们遇到那些和我们拥有相同特质的人的时候，我们头脑中的奖励机制就会被激活。而当我们面对那些与我们不同的人的时候，我们的共情能力会受到一定的影响，甚至呢，容忍度也会降低。在这个多元而流动的世界，身份成了一个前所未有的敏感和复杂的问题。不同的身份能否和谐相处？我们有没有可能建立起共同的身份呢？那首先呢，请允许我来介绍一下我们现场的几位嘉宾，他们是云南大学民族学与社会学学院院长、族群政治的作者关凯教授，北京大学社会学系教授、民族理论学者马荣教授，清华大学公共管理学院教授、清华大学苏世民书院院长薛兰教授。同时呢，介绍我们两位在线上参与讨论的海外的嘉宾，分别是英国前商务大臣温斯凯伯爵士，他是英国自由民主党的政治家和经济学家。欢迎耶鲁大学法学院终身教授蔡美儿女士，她是《虎妈战歌》《起火的世界》《政治部落》等著作的作者。欢迎各位。So first of all, I would like each of you to use 3 words to describe yourselves. Amy, can we start from you?
My first and strongest identity is with my family. That's my first identity. And then Chinese/American. I obey your instructions.
Yeah. What would be the third one?
Well, it's a close tie between professor and dog lover. I'm not sure.
Well, I think my identity is built around, first of all, my family, second, common educational standards, and I think thirdly, my nationality, British, but part of a wider European global culture.
我想我首先应该还是个中国人，另外一个我是个东北人。如果要是在内部的话，因为很有意思的是说，只有东北这个区域概念变成了一伙人，我也不知道他是怎么变成这样子。第三个当然还是个大学老师这样。
大学老师啊，马荣教授。
首先，我曾经是作为北京知青，在内蒙古草原呢当了5年的牧民。第二个身份就我在美国布朗大学呢拿到了博士学位，真是晋升于一个完全不同的教育体系。第三个呢，我87年毕业之后呢，回到北大任教，这30多年一直在北大当老师。
好像我要说的好多他们都已经说了，我得找点不同的。
找点不一样的。
我跟在座的各位，首先有个身份认同，我们都是老师。第二的话呢，我这个从小啊，当时因为文革期间不上课，所以我就各种小说乱七八糟看了很多。所以第二身份是读者。第三个身份的话呢，我是一个摄影者。
啊，我们同样的问题问了世界各地的一些年轻人，看看他们是怎么说的，他们有没有遇到过一些身份认同的焦虑呢？
Leadership, statistics, food
是艺术从事者，然后就是这个冒险家，还有生活美好收藏家。
Motivation, billionaire, and success.
Rapper, 媒体人，然后再有一个就是搞笑男吧。
compassionate, disciplined, and confused.
清华人嘛，然后是做一个计算机人，然后还有就是一个动漫爱好者。
我也是这个同一个世界的一个人，然后我是一个巴基斯坦人，然后我的信仰的话，我是信伊斯兰教。
旅居者、边缘人，还有地球人。
It always was kind of weird because I have a white last name, but I didn't look completely white. And some of my friends, my Filipino friends, would be like, I got the impression that they felt that I was a wannabe. instead of somebody a part of their culture.
But people will always just view me as Asian, or I'm not, or like Korean, Asian, and even that too. Like I might not be Korean. I'll just be like erased, into just another Asian.
我是一个北方人，就刚来到这个学校的时候，和我的朋友大家一起在走路的时候，他们之间会用粤语来交流，但是我自己听不懂，所以那个时候就会觉得，自己来这边刚开始会有点孤独。
我也有过，就是可能在有跟一些新的圈子玩耍的时候，可能他们就更喜欢，比如说打麻将，可能就那点有点融入不太进去，就还是感觉自己还是不是一个真中国人。就
From being an African American woman, starting a nonprofit, sometimes the funding sources aren't the same, and you have to jump through more hoops to try to get the same funding as like our white counterparts.
我们听到了各地的人们不同的回答，还是很能够引发我们的一些共鸣的。马蓉老师，先从您开始吧。我特别感兴趣，就是您18岁的时候啊，到了内蒙古大草原，然后试图成为一个牧民啊，那一段经历对一个年轻人意味着怎样的融入呢？
因为当时是在文化大革命期间嘛，号召所有的知青呢到农村去插队去了。我们来到蒙古国交界的公社，所以当地的社区呢没有汉人，而且是一个游牧的社会，种蒙古包、骑马放羊，给我们分了2000头羊，2000多只羊。
你管得过来吗？
我们因为草原非常辽阔，羊群是不会合群的。草原上的蒙古族非常的热情和淳朴，他们像接待孩子一样接待我们。牧民老太太给我们缝蒙古袍，教我们怎么宰羊。怎么认识草场，怎么接高。那时候呢，我们一身是这个羊骚味儿，每天骑马呢腿是罗圈腿，穿着蒙古袍子，到了火车上一看就说这是蒙古人。当年的北京知青跟当地的牧民蒙古族牧民呢，结下了非常深的友谊。
But when we're talking about identity, it's not just identity of individuals, but also groups. So, Amy, actually, I would like to have you to share some of your observations and studies on the Asian American ethnic group and their living conditions during the pandemic for the last 2 years.
Yadlan, this is, I think, the most difficult time to be an Asian American, and specifically a Chinese American. When I was very young, I was the only Asian in my school. But interestingly, it was very pleasant in many ways because at that time, this is in the 60s and 70s, China was not powerful and nobody was threatened by China in America. And there were also so few Asians, everybody kind of liked me. They were curious about me. But today, it's quite different. First, because China has grown so strong and powerful, a lot of Americans are intimidated and threatened by China. So right now, we have seen so much anti-Asian sentiment. I couldn't believe it. I mean, do you know that just last week in New York City, 8 Chinese Americans were punched in the face? Actually, Asian Americans. I mean, I've never heard of such a thing. It's really a distressing moment right now, and a lot of Asians feel that they can't complain because people say, oh, come on, other minority groups have it much worse. You're doing so well.
We know that the demand for dignity or self-esteem comes from what we call themos, our inner sense of worth, that every one of us want to have a sense of identity and respect from others. But that sense of worth is also evolving along with the time. So I would like to ask Dr. Cable, before and after Brexit, for example, how is the collective sense of Britishness being changed or evolved?
It has stirred up people's sense of identity. I think what has happened also over the last few decades is that you've got a growing sense of what you could call multiple identity. There are a lot of British people, as I say, younger people, more educated people, who feel British, but they also feel European, and they have a wider global outlook as well. And it's reconciling those different levels of identity And that's now being broken with Brexit to some extent.
薛兰教授，您在这个苏世民学院像个小联合国一样啊，来自全球的年轻人都在这里。这些年，你发现他们的这种身份 identity 有一些什么样的变化？他们是怎么去产生新的群体的呢？
我们每一届学生一般都有来自于差不多40-50个国家的学生，大家可能想象到的可能是中国同学一堆儿，然后美国同学一堆儿，但其实倒不是这样。非常明显就是有一批学生是有过创业经历或者有兴趣创业。所以你看这些学生他们经常在一起，还有一些可能是，要这个希望以后这个去做金融投资等等，还有一些呢可能是做这个公益，可能是根据个人的兴趣有各这种不同的这个 grouping。
Dr. Cable, in retrospect, how would you brief us on the major steps in the shaping of Britishness, for example?
We've been very fortunate being an island. We haven't been invaded, occupied for 1,000 years. There's also been a remarkable degree of stability. We haven't had a civil war for 300 years. And as a consequence, the way the country is run is not based on, written constitutions. It's based on a kind of self-confidence of a legal and political system that has evolved over a very long period of time. I think things have changed enormously over half a century ago. Britain was coming to terms with the loss of empire, becoming more of a European power. At the same time, the ethnic minorities in the UK, who have steadily grown, have become integrated into British society. Many of them have developed this sense of multiple identity. For example, in London, you will find Asian groups who see themselves as, say, Sikh, but also Indian, and also Londoners, also British. And I think things work best when we're not stuck with one single homogeneous identity, but are able to integrate on different levels.
其实我也想问一问中国的几位学者哈，我们都说中华民族共同体是一个大的一个身份认同，在历史上有哪些重要的时期使得这样的一个认同逐渐形成呢？在民族国家这样的一些定义上哈，诸位跟西方的学者会有一些什么不同的解释方式或者定义的方式吗？
其实我们现在谈到说民族、族群，或者我们说西方意义上的 state 国家，这实际上中国的传统文化还是有一定的距离的。中国从秦汉开始呢，就讲到的是有教无类，和而不同。所谓有教无类，不管什么人，只要你接受了中原文化一套伦理，那你就是华夏。华夏丧失伦理就是蛮夷。所以所谓夷夏之变呢，实际上是文化之差别，是社会伦理之差别。中华文化的基本特质呢，都是非无神论的世俗性。它第一个呢，不同于一神教，没有一个排他性的宗教，它又不反对宗教，所以呢，当然说和而不同，说这两个人群的语言不同、宗教不同没有关系，他们是可以共同生活、和平共处的。所以中国人在谈到群体之后呢，实际上既不存在着种族观，所以呢，很多学者说呢，中国是不可能产生西方的 nationalism， 这不存在土壤。
中国是个 culturalism。
对，按照这个 Lucien Pai from MIT， 他说中国是一个伪装成了民族国家的文明共同体。所以实际上要理解中国呢，它既不是一个西方的封建制为基础的安排，它也不是现在以民族主义为核心的一个 nation state， 它就是一个文化体，而且边缘不断在变化。只要你接收了这个文化，哪怕你是蛮夷，你可以入主中原。你讲孔孟之道，按照科举来做的话呢，就承认你是中华之主，不管皇帝来自于哪一个民族、哪一个族群，但呢，最后都是把中国传统文化这个脉络呢一直延续下来。所以呢，朝代不断的更替，但是这个文化实体是不断的在延续到今天。
I really agree with my your colleagues that I think the Chinese cultural identity was so attractive to so many different groups. I did really compare Rome at one point to the Chinese Empire. It was somehow very appealing in the same way that the Roman identity was very attractive to people from Africa to Spain to, Great Britain, and they all kind of wanted to be Roman citizens at a certain point. And I do think that it's when these empires can be relatively open and draw the talents of lots of different groups, but while still under a unifying framework, that you see the most strength and flourishing.
Yeah, so openness and inclusivity really can create development or flourishing of a culture or a society. 其实我们中国的历史上啊，这种多元一体、民族融合，被一些历史学家形容为滚雪球。你比如说华夏民族的这种意识的形成啊，到五胡入华的时期啊，民族融合都是这个空前的发展。所以我们的这个共同的身份呢，也是几经的蜕变和发展的。
对，其实我们有好几次大的融合，包括一些古代的族称，今天你已经找不到这些人了，就是结底腔啊，加上这个鲜卑啊，是吧？契丹这些都消失不见了。但是我们其实面临着一个问题，过去的中国的文化觉得我们是世界的中心，对吧？天下是整个的世界。但是等到西方现代性冲击了中国以后，我们面临的这个现代性确确实实是一个西欧的产物。然后呢，就有黑格尔的这种讲说东方没有历史，这个就变成了哈佛的那个人类学艾瑞克沃夫讲的，就是欧洲和没有历史的人民。在这个意义上，我们是没有历史的。我们可以看到一个自在的国家形态、文明的形态、人群集体认同的形态。但是我们甚至不知道怎么去解释它。
How to find a narrative 是吧？其实像民族这个字儿，过去在汉语当中也是没有的，也是近代从这个日文当中被输入进来的。
特别是在甲午战争之后，当时中国在甲午战争败得很惨，这时候呢，发现必须要改变自己了，于是开始就学日本。所以当时中国整个一套所有的小学、中学的教材，我们的历史、我们的地理，完全是日文翻过来的，所以这样的话就把这个民族带到了中国，而且呢，叫什么叫蒙古民族、满洲民族、藏民族、汉民族，这样的话就不但是把民族带到中国，而且呢，还把中国国内的清朝治下的各个群体呢都冠之以民族，这一下子呢就把我们中国国内以汉文表达的民族这个字的用法就完全打乱了。
我们的民族叫什么？叫大杂居小聚居，实际上是个犬牙交错的分布格局，就并没有一个什么地方是纯粹的是哪一伙人哪一种文化。中国的发展轨迹的和西方不大一样，它有一个人和人之间的连接是靠一些隐藏的默认的观念来连接的，这个东西就是中国人的生活方式。其实这才是它真正的中华民族共同体的一个深刻的一个根基。其实这是中国一个独特的经验。
Years ago, Samuel Huntington wrote a book entitled "Who Are We?" Basically, he examined the origin of the creation of American identity based on the Anglo-Protestant settlers and based on American creed. So basically, the identity of the U.S. Is not on particular ethnic or religion background, but rather on a series of values.
One thing very unique about the United States is that our founding, the story and the origins, is not based on a certain ethnic groups. I think that the U.S. identity is based on the Constitution. The U.S. Constitution is a document embodying certain values. For many centuries, the U.S. did not live up to, ideally, and these are ethnically and religiously neutral. So the best of America is when we sort of kind of follow that, and that's always been the strength of America, why it could attract immigrants from all over, because they wanted to come and be in a place where the identity was defined by the Constitution and not, by which ethnicity you're from. The problem right now is that we're seeing a lot of pressure. First of all, for the first time in US history, whites are about to lose their majority status at the national level. And this has resulted in all kinds of people feeling threatened. The white people always now feel our country is being taken away from us. So you see in the United States right now a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment, which I think is very, sort of counter to the American ideals. And you see politicians increasingly getting votes. So democracy and diversity that used to be two of America's great strengths right now are in many ways sources of division and polarization.
How about mutual reading or comprehension? Dr. Cable, you recently wrote books and also gave lectures on the misreading of China from the Western point of view. What are some of the common misunderstandings you have observed?
I think one of them relates to sort of basic economics. China has developed very rapidly over the last few decades. It's just becoming an economic superpower alongside the United States. I think very few people understand why this has happened so quickly and why it is that we have to deal with it on a practical business-like level rather than as a threat.
西方人总认为呢，国强必霸，这个和中华传统是不一样的。我们看中国的历史，你看，按照费孝通先生说呢，中华民族的它所占这个地方呢，它是有一个独特的地理的环境。基本上中国人就认为这一块就是一个最适合生存的地方。其实我们历代的皇帝就说，能把这一块适合于传统农耕的地域治理好，能够把老百姓都照顾好，旱灾水灾都处理好，这就已经是最好的皇帝，最好的国家了。比如说像中国，我们说像《礼记》，所谓叫他的理想叫天下大同。什么是大同呢？叫做犬贤以能，老有所终，壮有所用，优有所长，鳏寡孤弱，残疾者皆有所养。
像是一个福利社会的描述。
它是个福利社会，所以现在我们说，中国人民追求对于美好生活的追求，就是我们的奋斗目标。这和中国的古训是一脉相承的。西方的工业文明、民族国家和传统帝国呢，是有一个很强的侵略性。我们没有这种侵略的本质。多少年来，中国没有侵略，中国是被侵略。历代的皇帝不是说这凡是强大叫侵略，往往很多皇帝呢会根据历史经验呢说哪些地方是我们不能去侵略的。像郑和下西洋那么强大，他造船的技能远比西班牙、葡萄牙要好，但是他并不。所以中国的传统是保持一块净土，完了呢以周边的和为贵，有教无类，和而不同。
Very few of us speak the Chinese language, so these are very basic things where people are reacting to current events rather than looking back over history and look at its origins. So many misunderstandings. I think one of the misunderstandings, and this goes back to our earlier discussion here and many parts of the world, that as societies become richer and more educated and they get past the stage of basic needs and basic personal security, they will become more liberal in the sense of attaching more value to individual choice, individual preference in a social and a political way. And I think people in the West looking at China cannot understand why this process doesn't seem to have happened, that collective values continue to have a higher weight than they do in the West. And I think a lot of the misunderstandings come from that basic theory, if you like. It's not necessarily that a liberal system is better, I mean, it may well be, but that it is an inevitable outcome of successful economic development. And so why isn't it happening?
如果我们看这个中国发展的过程的话呢，的确是个人的选择会越来越多。 个人享有的各种自由也越来越大。我觉得其实呢，这个过程是在发生。但是另外一点的话，就中国的实际的这个发展的话呢，是非常非常复杂的。中国的各个地方的发展非常不平衡的，所以其实中国在很多政策制定的时候呢，很难所有的政策我都能够去让每个人都按照自己的想法去做。那么这样的话呢，可能就会产生很大的混乱。
我觉得西方的民众有把两个词、把两个概念把它绝对化，一个叫自由，这实际上呢，它的自由好像是无边的，是无限的，是没有禁忌的。但是在中国这个社会，自古以来是大的水灾、旱灾、蝗灾、瘟疫，它必须要有一定的政府的来管理。如果每个人都自由的话，这社会是无法这个维系的。所以就实际上这个社会形成了，就是群众会让渡一些自己的自由，来让给全社会的公共福利。这一点可能在西方觉得那就是你干涉我的自由了。另外一项像民主选举、多党制，这个呢在西方认为是非常绝对的，这表现了一个 democracy 是吧？但是在中国就实际上呢，因为老百姓的选票是很容易被偶然事件和情绪化的东西来鼓动的，未必是对于全体的大多数老百姓是最合理的结果。所以中国的选举，大家会把这个很多更依赖于这个制度，不是靠一人一票。多数通吃，这个制度在西方的理解上，我觉得很多人是有点绝对化的。
You know, I wanted to say something else too about the too much freedom and the need for some collective unity. Interestingly, we are having this problem in the United States right now. You know, you always hear about how much freedom and openness, but right now there's a lot of sense of everything's just fragmenting, breaking apart in the United States. And I see a lot of the younger generation, instead of respecting the founding fathers that wrote the US Constitution, you hear a lot of progressive students saying, oh, those are just dead white males. We don't respect them. You know, why should we listen to them? So a lot of people are not respecting the US Constitution anymore. So I really sympathize with the earlier comment that you need something to preserve unity, and if you have too much freedom, too much separateness, then it's very difficult to have both stability and also a collective identity.
Dr. Cable, what are some of your observations of usually the Chinese misreading of the West?
I think one of them is perhaps to exaggerate the extent to which the West has enormous problems of decline. Actually, there are some bad things that have happened, Brexit, Trump, but nonetheless, Western societies, including Britain, are in many ways very resilient. And we're adjusting to the Brexit phenomenon. I don't like it, but it's happening, and we're adjusting and coming to terms with reality. Whereas I am a great admirer of the progress of China in economic and social terms. I think you should also accept that the West has also got very considerable strengths, and that the theory of decline may not be true.
我也特别同意Sir Cable 讲，就是西方是有很强的 resilience 来解决它所面临的这些问题。其实现在我们也是一个更加多元一个社会，可能是有很多不同的声音。包括公众对同样的事情也会有很多不同的看法。
In the past 30 years or so, the overall output of the world in goods and services basically quadrupled. But then not necessarily everyone benefited from it. Amy, you wrote about the internal conflict between a market-dominant minority versus electoral democracy, and how has that divided the American society in recent years.
Yes, so the United States was always economically and politically dominated by a kind of a white majority with more oppressed minorities. Today, something very interesting and again troubling has changed. That is, we are starting to see kind of the emergence of a new kind of elite, and we call them coastal elites or cosmopolitan elites. And there are, I think there's an equivalent in the UK too, and maybe China. But these are the people who live in New York or San Francisco or the big cities, and they're typically educated in the same fancy schools, Harvard, Yale, Stanford. They think they're very cosmopolitan, they think they're very tolerant, but this little group is very resented by the rest of America, kind of President Trump's base, the poor, less educated Americans who sometimes live in the South. And they feel, these elites, they care more about immigrants and they care more about the poor in Africa than they care about the poor in our own country. And you see this division right now between, more educated cosmopolitan elites who are actually very snobby in their own way, and then less educated parts of the country that are, of course, also more resistant to globalization. So that's something very dominant going on in the United States right now.
其实在中国是不是也会有一些情绪是通过这样的方式来表达的，实际上背后是一个经济发展的不均衡呢？
是，比如说在中国改革开放之前，中国的整个的经济运行，包括分配体制是计划经济，工资制是全国统一的。但是当我们实行改革开放之后，很多企业转变为私营企业，大学生毕业之后呢不包分配了，要你自己去求职了。所以这样的话呢，在这种情况，原来的地区发展的不平衡，当计划经济这个保证公平的制度消除之后，就变成为一种劳动市场上的自然竞争。而西部地区的维吾尔族由于汉语不够好，他在学习时候数理化的成绩不太好，所以他在就业市场上就处于劣势。这样的话就很容易引发这种以民族为群体边界的一种身份认同的一种群体竞争。
薛教授也观察到，随着近些年的社会经济的发展，其实像农民工的这样的一个身份和他们的二代的生活工作选择也出现了一些有趣的变化。
对，中国改革开放以后的话呢，其实有大批的农民工啊，从农村到沿海城市来工作。一开始就是把小孩都留在家里，希望就挣些钱回家。但是随着我们这个改革开放的深入，很多人就在当地就落下来了啊，甚至于呢，很多人就把孩子带到当地去就学。所以很多农民工的子弟，他实际上是在城市长大的，但是呢，他在城市没有我们讲的这种合法的身份户口。如果他们要是高考没有考上大学，那么他们其实就面临一个就是到哪儿去发展。应该说城市就是最熟悉的，但另外一点呢，他在那儿发展去找工作等等又会面临重重困难，而他要想回去他的原来的农村的家庭，他回不去了，他不会种地，他在那儿没有任何社会资本，根本就没有办法去生存，
所以他有一种身份危机了。
他到底是在那个原来的农村的身份，还是在城市的身份？他两边都会找不到自己的这个所谓叫做身份认同。
My next question is about this a little weird age of information. On one hand, it seems we have more information than we need, but then on the other hand, each one of us are living consciously or unconsciously in the information bubble. We tend to be grouped with the people that we think, who think like us or act like us. So the bias or prejudice is further strengthened or reinforced instead of diffused. How can we change that, Amy?
Well, this is, I think, one of the biggest problems now. All of the groups, just as you say, Yang Lang, they go into smaller and smaller echo chambers, their own bubbles, and it used to be at least 20 people. Now you could have with social media, you can find your people, like only 3 of you. So it's very fractured. The key is, how do you counter human nature? Because there's this natural tendency, especially if you read something that seems unfair, that the other side, they're being unfair to us, then you get mad and you want to attack back. So we have to break that cycle.
Yes, there are 2 problems here. One is the bubble, which you describe, I think the other, which is related, which is the idea of alternative facts. Well, things that are obviously facts, you know, issues of science around climate change or COVID, people are debating them as if they are just theories. So we have ridiculous arguments between whether there is climate change or no climate change, whether the world is round or whether the world is flat. This is a ridiculous situation, and I think we need more face-to-face contact between people from different countries, and maybe we need to wait to the end of the COVID restrictions before we have people moving now more freely and engaging directly, so we can escape from these bubbles and alternative facts.
其实今天我们看到的身份的重新塑造，这个和世界都很相似的。整个在全球化刺激之下，宗教的复兴、民族主义的复兴，其实它是一个共享的过程。那今天我们如何要能找到一种方式来超越这个东西？我觉得很重要的还是要大家彼此倾听，不是仅仅的把对方想象成一个固定不变的，或者是某一种单向度的一个共同体。其实我们在这个之上有一个更大的共同体，就是整个人类社会面临的今天的挑战是高度相似的。
我接下来想请各位嘉宾都给我们举一些成功的案例哈，无论是发生在中国的还是世界上的任何一个地方啊，你们觉得在这种共同身份的塑造上是非常成功的，也许我们可以互相启发。
美国在民权运动之后呢，废除了学校的种族隔离制度，实际上就让有才能的黑人学生可以进入好的中学。另外呢，以这政策优惠呢，进入像哈佛这样的名校，给他们进入上层社会，能够为自己本族群去发言，争取利益化的是一个象征。我觉得这个呢，实际上这是非常重要的。
Interestingly, there are a lot of positive psychological studies that show that if you can just get people to interact as individuals first, before they know about their political divisions, it's amazing how successful that can be. And I have a positive example actually from my own class right now. I have 80 students and it's extremely diverse. I have a lot of students from China. I also have 11 African American students. I have 7 Muslim American students. I have Trump supporters. I have mostly progressives. And somehow I set the rules. I think leadership is important. I said, look, we are going to have a conversation. And if somebody says something that bothers you, your reaction won't be just to be angry. You have to express what it is that bothered you, and then we will go back and forth and have a conversation. And I was so surprised. It's extremely successful. In such a different and diverse class, it's been a fun experience, and we've been able to talk about lots of complicated issues. So I think setting the ground rules is very important, and then almost like creating the channels for listening and communication.
I would cite the example of London, which was 40 years ago, was a terribly declining city, losing population, industry, manufacturing industry was going. There was growing poverty, there was very poor levels of education in schools. And this has, in many ways, turned around. I mean, this is now a global city, emphasis on creative industries and services, very diverse. 50% of the population is now ethnic minorities. We have a Muslim mayor. There is a lot of dynamism. Education has been emphasized, and the school system is significantly better. So even when you have a declining city, you can turn it round with a combination of good social policy, emphasis on education, also on transport connectivity. These are the things that really make a difference.
薛教授有什么好的经验可以分享？
实际上我看到的就是在苏氏民书院，这个有很多国际学生，他们到这个苏氏民书院来学习1年以后呢， 已经打破了原来的这种我们想象的界限。他学完以后，他可能还回到他自己国家，他看到中国的发展机会，愿意在中国新兴的这个行业发展。而且更好的话，不同国家同学们之间互相一起来商讨，有些什么样的新的好的发展机会，可能我们一起合作，一起到非洲去发展，到美国去发展，到其他地方去发展。所以这个可能是今后我们特别希望能看到各个国家的年轻人能够在一起学习、一起成长、一起去创业、一起去解决我们人类面临的问题。
那么我最后想问大家的是，有一些什么样的情况我们是应该警惕的？我们不应该做一些什么事情，来让这种身份政治恶化？
我们首先不能强调单一向度的身份，我们每个人都是多向度的身份，都是跨界的。就是我们不能让任何一个单一的身份变得至上，掩盖其他的身份，这样我们才是一个真正的现代人。
我觉得，在一个现代的法治的国家，不管你出生于哪个族群，你最重要的身份是你的公民身份。而在国家大的法律制度之下，每一个公民的权利应当是相等的。
我想，可能我们要更加清晰地分清楚，我们跟 identity 相关的政策背后的依据是什么？到底是促进融合，还是可能说不定会
或者加剧了隔阂。
I actually agree with the previous speakers. How many common problems we all mentioned. I like the way we began. If we think about common goals rather than stressing common differences and then turning those into identities, if we can look for new ways of interacting that are organized not by ethnicity, but like solving certain problems, I think that would be the best direction because it seems like humanity faces many of the same challenges wherever we live.
I would say two things. I think, first of all, you need very strong legal underpinnings so that if there is actual discrimination, it is illegal and people have rights to the courts. It may be that actually you're trying to change human behavior. The second point is the importance of leadership in showing solidarity when you do have bad episodes.
各位提的这个建议都非常有意思啊，这让我想到，在1954年的时候，社会学家们曾经在美国的俄克拉荷马州一个叫做 Roberts Cave 的地方啊，举办了个夏令营。他们把一群11、12岁的男孩分为2组，一开始呢让他们相互竞争啊，比如通过一些体育运动或完成一些工作来看哪一组表现得更好。很快他们就发现2组男孩之间产生了隔阂，甚至有一些冲突和争论。随后呢，他们又人为地制造了一个当地的水源短缺，结果呢又发现这2组男孩很快就携起手来共同面对危机。这说明了什么呢？这说明我们人类既有冲突的动机，也有合作的潜能。关键要看这游戏规则是如何制定的。好，那接下来我们通过一组街头的访问，来看看世界各地的年轻人对待差异性或者不同的意见有一些什么样的想法和解决之道。
保持沉默。
我第一选择应该是去劝他，让他同意我的这种观点和方式。
我直接写首歌 diss 他。
我会选择第三方人来解决这件事情。
I definitely just prefer to avoid conflict whenever I can, just try to compromise whenever I can.
I really enjoy arguing with my friends on about intellectual topics.
It's an important conversation to have.
Say it's better to be exposed to people who have opposite values from you.
But you should also be able to be vulnerable and tell the people what you think.
Not only learn about other people's experiences, but acknowledge them as valid and make sure we are all heard.
That everybody has a story.
我是非常乐意去告诉他们我们是怎么样的。
我觉得每个人这个差异就是他的特点所在。我了解他们的差异，就相当于可以了解到他们的文化。
差异其实是更多带来一种像是其他色彩的东西。它可能我是这个颜色，那其他人可能代表着另一种颜色，那么加起来可能才是这个世界真正原本的样子。
It's important to see the world.
Doesn't matter where you are in the world or what religion you practice or what language you speak.
观点不同也是无关紧要的。
I think it's important to let everyone know that we're all on the same side.
As long as we come from a place of love, that's all that matters.
看到他们的这样非常丰富和生动的语言哈，大家有些什么感想？
我觉得这可能就是我们未来的世界的希望。
这费孝通先生也很著名的提出过各美其美，美美与共啊。
就是我们每一个人要尊重自己的祖先的文化，还要善于从对方身上吸取他所有的而自己缺乏美德和才能，这样一种良性的互动，就能造成一个真正的一个和谐的社会。
其实我们可以看到，在世界各地的这些年轻人，他们其实都是在倡导文化宽容。其实这个已经成为了一个世界的新的共识。我想在这样的话，它会带来一个美好明天的一个社会的基础。
I like the optimism, the outward-looking comments of those young people, not turning aside from people of different color, different nationality. And I think one of the good things about the discussion is that we've all finished up in the same place.
Yes, I think it's a great reminder that I think there's a big silent majority that actually wants harmony, that wants unity. When we read in the news or newspaper or social media, it's actually a minority of the angriest voices. And I think it's a nice reminder that if you just go out into the real world, as Sir Cable just said, we all kind of want the same thing.
Thank you very much. We do have reasons for hope. 身份可以用于分裂，也可以用于整合。其实我们难免会受到偏见的影响，但是意识到偏见的存在，就是我们认知的向前一步。我们每个人都不是某一个标签的囚徒，我们的身份也并非一成不变。拥抱多元和融合，并且不断地创造自我是有可能的。在多的背后，还有一个一。毕竟，作为人类，我们有着某种共同的命运，也拥有共同的家园。好，感谢你收看本期的文化相对论，我们下期见。文化相对论当中的“相对”一词有两重含义：一是每个民族、每个国家有自己的文化根性；二是我们的交流互鉴能够彼此启发，并且带来合作。欢迎各位。
推动这件事儿，就是为了我们这个地球的未来。
The poverty is many diseases, just like cancer.
You change one thing, it has so many unforeseen consequences.
Globalization has come, so here is a challenge.
中国在1000年以前就做到了这一点。It is a totally different culture.
我们应该遵循自然的发展。Nothing against the grain.
希望能看到各个国家的年轻人能够在一起去解决我们人类面临的问题。